Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in our international community. Welcome. My name is Herb. I'm an alcoholic. This workshop is not directly connected to 12-step fellowship. It certainly is indirect. I've been sober since February 21st, 1984, and the 12-step process is the one that delivered me to freedom. And I'd like to really keep that as sort of the resounding centerpiece of today's discussion, at least from my experience. The 12 steps and Alcoholics Anonymous delivered me from addiction, but more especially when I was about 5 years sober, delivered me from unmanageability. And that's where the forgiveness process began. And it is a process. And it takes time, like the awakening, a process. My abstinence from alcohol was a gift of grace prior to my ever coming to Alcoholics Anonymous. But coming to Alcoholics Anonymous introduced me to people who understood the instructions in the big book and the mechanical process of the application of the 12 steps from the big book. I was 5 years sober, though, when I met those people, and they began to help me navigate the path. You've heard me, if you've been exposed to me at all, say that I didn't know that I didn't know. That was the most embarrassing thing. I wasn't embarrassed that I was an alcoholic. A story for a different day. Very happy to find a diagnosis. I had been a seeker all my life, but I had never been a finder. And that was the beginning of the finding, when I was able to understand the nature of the biological and, in some senses, the psychological problem. But then when I worked the steps out of the big book, I had what's called a spiritual awakening. That's the promise of the 12 steps. An awakening that introduced me to the spiritual problem, unmanageability. For the very first time, doing an inventory that allowed me to again see that I didn't see and know that I didn't know, that I'm 100% responsible for my thoughts and my emotions and my attitudes, and most especially my behavior. That at 48, 49 years old, 4 or 5 years sober, I had a rite of passage into true adulthood for the very first time. It was embarrassing to look back over my shoulder and see the cluelessness and the inability to know, almost like colorblind. I didn't have the capacity to see color until I was given the capacity to see color. That's a metaphor. I'm still colorblind. So I'd like to give an introduction to the forgiveness process, a very short introduction, overview, and then introduce Fred to give the meat and potatoes of the forgiveness process. This is his bailiwick, his centerpiece, his center point, his bullseye. So as I mentioned, forgiveness is a process. And I knew nothing about forgiveness literally, even though I had successfully navigated the first 9 steps with the guidance of a step guide at 5 years of sobriety. And I had had a very powerful spiritual awakening, meaning It's really simple. It's not sophisticated in the sense of a description. It's certainly sophisticated in sense of an experience. But the description, as I summarize Appendix 2 from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and if you haven't read it recently or read it, please do read it, and more than once probably, and spend some meditation time on it. Because it expresses the purpose of the 12-step process and the promise of the 12-step process, a spiritual awakening. It tells you what is an awakening, what is an experience, how are they the same and how are they different. My summary is that it's a change, a radical change in me when I apply those steps 1 through 9. That's the promise. Not until you finish the 9th step. That would be an interesting question for you to ask yourself if you're in a 12-step program. Have you actually done steps 4 through 9, each of them, as well as you can, and finish them as well as you can, including finishing the 9th step? See, that's the program of recovery, steps 1 through 9. It's promised on page 84. I'm not paraphrasing, I'm quoting. We are placed in a position of neutrality. You see, the addiction has been neutralized by the end of the 9th step. Well, what I didn't know until later on, when I was asked to do some work on forgiveness, and that's where I met Fred Luskin. We were asked to do a panel probably 30 years ago, just after he had published his book on forgiveness. And so I actually looked it up in a dictionary. Forgiveness is a decision to release, a decision for freedom. So I'm asking you now here to sort of cooperate with what the Big Book says. We need to release our old ideas, and what was reinforced by Einstein. The consciousness that created the problem cannot be the consciousness that solves the problem. We need a new consciousness. That's what that awakening is all about. That's what spiritual experience is all about. Is having the veil lifted so that we can see the truth. It's kind of like cataract surgery. If anybody has had that or knows about it, there's a film that develops over the eyes so that it's so gradual we don't know that there's a film that dulls our ability to see reality as it is. And when it's diagnosed properly and removed properly, the curtains are pulled back and we're able to see reality as we perceive reality more clearly. Maybe not as it is, but certainly more clearly. So I'm asking you to have an open mind and an open heart as you approach our discussion today, Fred's and mine, concerning forgiveness. Be willing, at the very least, to be delivered to a new experience. Have an open mind to listen to the teachings. Have an open heart to cooperate with the experiences that might be offered today. Spirit of the universe, please set aside everything that I think I know about myself, my path to freedom, and my process of forgiveness, for an open mind and a new experience with myself, my path to freedom, and especially my process of forgiveness. So I'm going to pause for just a minute. Fred has joined us, and I met Fred about 30 years ago, maybe longer, quite frankly. It was just after he published his book, Forgive for Good. And he's a clinical psychologist, did his educational work and research at Stanford University, is and or was a professor there. wrote this book based on his doctoral dissertation, strictly science. There's no religion, there's no spirituality, at least intended. It's really science. He's a clinical psychologist, he's a scientist. He refers to him as having a secular approach in contrast to the 12-step or the religious approach, which is a spiritual approach, secular versus spiritual. But there's no conflict. What we discovered is, and we did a panel together, and at least I saw that the process is identical. The dynamic underneath the process is identical. The vocabulary is different, but the outcome is the same, and that's freedom. Freedom from the tentacles of this cancer of forgiveness. Fred, are you able to and willing to join us a little bit and introduce yourself, and then I'll give an overview, warming us up, and then come back to you?
Hello, everyone. My name is Fred. I'm a secular, I guess, academic forgiveness teacher. Even though my own belief system is that secular and spiritual should be saying the same thing with different bases and maybe different, I don't even know what. There's one truth out there, and you can hit it from all sorts of different points. You can hit it from science, and you can hit it from intuition, and we all take our little piece from it. But my reason for being secular is I have taught what I do out of Stanford University. And so there's a basic premise that the work that I offer will have at least some basis in science. And I'm a strong supporter of that. You know, you don't want to be promoting things that science completely says are ridiculous. So, you know, if your religion said the earth is flat, good. But there's a lot of data that's ridiculous. So anyway, about almost 30 years now, I've been teaching and researching and just trying to get people to be more kind-hearted towards life. I mean, that would be the only really basic fundamental thing about this. When you're unforgiving about anything, you're harsh, brittle, self-righteous, self-pitying, but you're not kind-hearted. And you do a lot of damage to yourself and other people, even though you may not recognize it. Many of us don't recognize the harm of our self-pity. The problem with self-pity, I mean, there's nothing wrong with any of these experiences, but self-pity is mostly about the self. And whenever you're overly focused on the self, you're missing a lot in life. I mean, it's just, the research on happiness shows that the hardest part of becoming happier is taking yourself out of the center of the universe. And I don't say that like just stupidly or, just to be provocative. So the 12-step programs, they're wonderful programs. There's nothing out there that works perfectly for anything. So, you need a variety of approaches, and you need some humility. But just that idea of self-pity, the reason that gratitude is such a powerful force is real gratitude minimizes the self. Like this is stuff that researchers and academics who have really thought about gratitude, and not the fake gratitude you get on Facebook or LinkedIn, which generally have nothing whatsoever to do with gratitude. Telling everybody how great your life is not gratitude. Maybe publicity, arrogance, self-satisfaction, pride, but it's not gratitude. Gratitude is a humble appreciation of things outside yourself. And think about that. The self-pity is an obstacle to gratitude, which is one of the reasons it's so dangerous. Self-pity means the world didn't give me enough, or I haven't benefited enough, or I've screwed up so much that I'll never move on. But it cuts out the capacity to see how much we're given all the time. Gratitude is not, wow, I achieved a lot. Gratitude is, wow, it's amazing that I had this opportunity to achieve a lot. That people helped me. That my brain still works. While I was achieving, the whole world was managing itself so it didn't fall apart. So I didn't, had that happened, I would have had nothing to achieve. Gratitude is generally responds to an accurate view of the world, which is that we are really tiny. And that we rely on the kindness of strangers and the kindness of friends and the kindness of people to do their jobs and all the ways the world functions that have nothing to do with us. Gratitude is the easiest way to overcome our self-absorption. It is, I don't even know what to say, because there's enough science on it. There really is. There's enough science on gratitude, more than the other virtues, about how it's an essential reorientation from it's all about me to let me position myself accurately in a very interdependent, cooperative world that also benefits me. And when you start to look for how it is that you have benefited from a remarkable world that you had nothing to do with creating and almost nothing to do with maintaining, your heart opens. Because you realize the astounding privilege it is to be part of this. Just astounding. And therefore, you begin to see things more clearly. There's an interesting study on cardiovascular disease, which I just love. They did this simple thing. I mean, some research is very creative. Some of it's just stupid, but some of it's really creative. So they did this study where they simply asked people, just talk. And we'll record you for 15 minutes. And just talk. And they talked, and then they transcribed what they said. And fascinatingly enough, the more people use the words me, mine, and my, the higher their risk was of heart disease. The more self-focused they were. Just that. 15-minute chat, how you do, just here I am, I'm Fred, whatever. and the more it was all about Fred, the more at risk I was for cardiovascular disease, the more it was about, well, let me tell you how lucky I am to have these wonderful kids. Or let me tell you about the privilege I have doing the work that I do. Or let me tell you how much I love stamp collecting. Didn't matter what the content was. Me, mine, my predicted cardiovascular disease. Because me, mine, my is usually an approach that leads to victimhood. It's all about me. Well, if it's all about you, the world's a sucky place. Because the world isn't focused on me, mine, mine. It's focused on the world. But when you're just focused on my, me, mine, then you're not in such a happy camper spot. And the world don't look so good because it's not there for my, me, mine. And one of the real obstacles that they have found to happiness is self-pity, self-preoccupation. And it's all bullshit. I mean, it's not all bullshit. A lot of it's bullshit. No, it's not all bullshit. Some of it's true. But this extra, poor me, I did bad, I'm not good enough, the world isn't perfect. It's all just a point of view that's hurtful to yourself, usually hurtful to others, and generally inaccurate. There's a spiritual teacher that I respect, I guess is the right word. And one of his statements of what we owe the world is he says, well, you're breathing the world's free air. So you better give something back. Like, let's just get as elemental as we can here. You're breathing the earth's free air. So your whole life is a gift, every inch of it. So if you want to look at things clearly, you better give something back to the source that's giving you life. That's his very simple spiritual teaching. The other spiritual teaching that I liked that actually changed my life was the Buddha's interesting response to what's the appropriate way of relating to one's parents or something to that line. And he said that if we spent the rest of our lives trying simply to pay back the kindness they showed us when we were helpless, it would be insufficient. And I, at that point, had a very crappy relationship with my mother. Now, it's not that my mother was easy, but I read this Buddha thing. This was when I was just starting in this forgiveness world, and I was reading a lot of stuff. And I was reading a lot of stuff built on an overlay of not really liking my own mother and probably not wanting to do that much about it, because at that point I figured forgiveness was for other people and I was going to teach them. I mean, this is a while ago, but I'm just saying that's how I saw it. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to help the world, but I can go, say nasty things to my own mother because something she did 20 years ago, which now seems so obscene to me, it's hard to believe that I could have defended myself being unkind because something my mother did 20 years ago. Now that's a joke to me. It's so offensive. But then I was, like, hey, she did some crappy things. But I remember reading this thing by the Buddha, and I'm thinking, okay, I have two choices here. One, I can say that the Buddha's wrong, which probably won't get me that far because the Buddha had a better reputation than I did, and he had helped lots of people, but that was a serious contender. The Buddha's wrong. The other was to maybe think that maybe I'm not looking at this correctly. Like there's a chance that maybe I'm missing something here. It's possible. So I was married to a very nice woman, and I brought this up to her. And she said, yeah, Fred, I've been trying to tell you for years, you're an asshole to your mother. I mean, that's what she said. You're an asshole. She probably even used that word. You're an asshole. And she was right, but I didn't buy it because my mother had done the wrong thing at times. Like that's the conundrum we all face. It wasn't like my mother was always great. And it wasn't that she didn't hurt me, she did. She had problems, and her marriage was problematic and whatever. And she grew up at a time when women were stifled. She would have wanted a much bigger life, and she ended up being a housewife in suburbia, which did not fit her at all. But the key thing is, my wife looked at me and said, "You're an asshole." And so now I got the Buddha and my wife against me. And so, what are you going to do? I changed. But when I changed, it's not like all of a sudden my mother became a great mother. She's the same mother. But I changed. And that's what forgiveness is. It's not like the world all of a sudden becomes a different place. And it's not like there weren't people who hurt you, and it's not like you didn't fail. Of course you failed. You're human. You're meant to fail. You are. I mean, I don't know how to, I've taught so many times that I don't always, I try to look for new words to say the same thing, but of course you failed. Of course people have failed you. Of course the world is a mess. Always been. Always. Always and forever. Always. How long do you want to talk about your particular drama? Is the only question. That's the only question. Of course the world is a mess. It's always been a mess. You know, you got the Bible with history of 2,000 and 3,000 years ago. The world was a mess then. You read world literature throughout all of human history. The world's a mess. People do nasty things to each other and themselves. Always. Always, 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 always. So that's not the news. It's like, I'm trying to, I have taught so many people these simple truths, so many people, that it's tough being a human being. Like, that's the first simple truth. It's tough. Many of you didn't have great parents to give you a head start. You know, many of you may not have seen between your parents loving connection. Many of you didn't have parents who modeled kindness to each other. So you don't have that template in your brain from an early age. So it's going to be harder for you as an adult to manifest a loving relationship. That's true. It's just true. We need, as an infant, we need models of what it should look like. We need to see how moms and dads behave so we can grow up and be one. And if we don't have that model, then it makes it much harder on us. Many of us, you, had parents who weren't even kind to themselves. Right? You understand? Like, so where do you learn that? It's hard. Life is hard. The problem for each of us is how much our suffering and difficulty is intensified when we blame. It's one thing to say, my parents didn't know how to love each other, so I missed an opportunity to see that kind of teaching, which made it much harder on me. That's true. But when you blame them for why your life didn't turn out, that's where truth loses. Like, yes, they didn't provide you a model, so you had to learn it someplace else. If you didn't learn it someplace else, that's not their fault. You're responsible for your life. I'm responsible for my life. But your parents, one of their opportunities is to teach us how to do this life, and many of them fail. They do, they fail. And if they neglected you or abused you when you were young, then your brain didn't have an opportunity to develop fully. So one, you lack models, and two, you're like starting eighth grade with a fifth grade brain. And all that's true, but it's not their fault. Like, it's all true. Absolutely. They made it harder on you when you were helpless. And that's on them. But the rest of your life is not on them. And that's why we all need to forgive. Because otherwise, we still think we're 8 or 13 or 6, and it's their fault. And it's not their fault when you're 40. It's your responsibility. I mean, that's just reality. That's not, it has nothing to do with me. Like, that's just the way it is. And the bigger view, life is simply hard. Even if you have great parents, it's hard. Even if you were shown what love looks like, it's hard. I hope you see what I'm saying. That yes, there are legitimate obstacles that you want to be aware of clearly, because you don't want to BS yourself. You don't want to beat yourself up because you haven't made a great success of your life. But it's not your parents' fault. It's that you had difficulties that were legitimate and you never fully figured out how to overcome them. And there's nobody to blame. There's just life. And when you also recognize honest truth that everybody's life has difficulty. If you want to see something very poignant, I don't remember exactly what it was, like 10 years ago. I saw a picture of Bill Clinton. He was president, I think, from 1992 to 2000. And then maybe like 2008 or 10, they showed a picture of him. And he was not a happy boy. He had lost a lot of weight. He had like quadruple bypass surgery. He was no longer young. And I looked at that picture and thought, yeah, this was the most powerful person in the world for 8 years. And if you think Monica Lewinsky was telling the truth, he had sex with hundreds of attractive women, and he was not a happy boy. So life is not easy. And there's suffering everywhere. The question is, can you handle your suffering with some kindness? That's the question for you, for me. You're not going to have a suffering-free life. There's no such thing. And again, even if your parents did the absolute best that they could, they're going to mess you up a little bit because they're messed up. I went to see my son the other day. I was traveling back to California, And I stopped, he lives in Denver. So I stopped, and he and his girlfriend, I spent some time with them. We went to a ball game, and they have a lovely relationship, the two of them. And, he turned out fine, and he's got some of the same stuff that he had when he was 14. Nobody's perfect. So you got some difficult questions here. Really, existentially difficult questions. How do you deal with the crap that came onto your plate? Which is not an easy question. And two, how do you love other imperfect human beings? Because they're going to be as batshit as you are. They are. They're going to be as batshit as you are. I mean, what I'm saying is that's what I saw when I visited my son, who's now 30. And, he's fine. He has a job. He's got a lovely relationship. He's fine. He's a good kid. All that. And yet, he's a human. So even with my own son, I had to remind myself, he's just a person. He's not perfect. He's going to do some things that are terrific. He's going to do some things that are not so terrific. So here's a story where I both saw him and I saw a reflection of me in him, and the blessing that he also has a good partner the way I did, where I had a partner who would tell me, Fred, like you're an asshole towards your mother. So I was flying through to Denver, and we went to a ball game, and it was like 10:30 at night, and I was going to take an Uber to the hotel. So my son gives me a hug, and he says, "Dad, I'll see you, whenever." And, good night. And he starts to walk away, and I go into the bathroom. And then, like 25 seconds later, he runs in and taps me on the shoulder and said, "I'll drive you to your hotel." I knew that didn't come from him. He went back. His girlfriend looked at him and said, "Where's your dad?" And my son said, "Oh, he's on his way to the hotel." The girlfriend looked at him, "Are you crazy? You're sending a man like much older than you alone back to the hotel? We'll drive him." So he ran back and got me. And that's my son. That was me. So we're not perfect. The question is, can we love life in its imperfections? And can we love people in their imperfections? That's our question. You can't do that without healthy doses of forgiveness. You can't do that without healthy doses of forgiveness. You can't do that without healthy doses of gratitude. You can't. You will run up against your self-absorption. Because when it's all about you, and when it's all you see is you, the world's not such a great place. But when you look a little more with the eyes of gratitude and humility and are able to see things more clearly, then it's different. That's different. But when you're just looking at through poor me, and what didn't the world give me now, and how was I not loved when I was 8, you're going to not see things too clearly. You really are going to distort reality. That's one of the key things I've learned teaching forgiveness all these years, is how much we distort reality when our biases are self-pitying. This is a tough lesson for us humans. that we are distorting reality through our self-pity, even though we think finally we're seeing it clearly and we can get those suckers to pay. You're actually not seeing it clearly. So forgiveness and gratitude, and the third little triangle of that is compassion. If you don't have some compassion for every single schnook, including you, that you see, you are not seeing this life clearly at all. If you don't recognize how hard it is for everyone, if you think it's just you struggling and just you who suffered, you are missing reality. Really, you are missing reality. And if you can't see your lover or your partner or your best friend also through the eyes of compassion, you're not seeing them. You're missing them completely. Because they had things that suck in their life too. As did you, as did I. Now, it doesn't mean you let everybody do everything just because they've had difficult experiences. That's not being a human being either. You have to like draw some boundaries and have some limits and like, you know, be willing to say no sometimes. But that essential compassion, first for you, it's hard to be a human being. It is. It's hard to be a human being. You don't get a great manual. You don't. You got to figure a lot of this stuff out, and it's not easy. So, compassion for you. Like one of the questions that I get asked a lot is some combination of, well, I learned to forgive my dad. He was a shithead, but I know he was a shithead because he was treated as a shithead when he was a kid. And that's not quite compassion. I mean, it's heading there a little bit, but calling somebody a shithead, I know immediately you're not exactly full of compassion for them. And if you try to explain to yourself why he's a shithead, then you're missing the point a bit. But what's easier, much easier, than reaching for compassion for people who have hurt you is to look inside of you for compassion towards you as a hurtable human being. I'm hurtable. I'm vulnerable. I'm scared. I can be weak. All those are true. You want to have compassion for that. It's hard to be a human being. It's hard to be a human being. Almost nobody does it that well. It's weird, isn't it? I mean, it's like very few of us do it that well. I mean, that's a weird thing. It's like in baseball, you know, the best players get a hit 3 out of 10 times. Probably the same thing for all of us. The best players in life get a hit like 3 out of 10 times. Gratitude, compassion, forgiveness. Those are the triangle that I think is the essence of a healthy, loving experience. Gratitude's the easiest. So let me do a simple gratitude meditation with all of us. So I'm going to do 2 of them. Let me just ask you first to, if you're going to do this meditation, you need to put your phone someplace where the sun doesn't shine. I mean, get it away from you. Seriously, get it away. If you're looking at the computer, close down the other stuff on there so you're not distracted. But if you want to do a meditation, you have to put your technology so it's not front and center. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to do that. Clear some space where if you want to relax, you can. And part of that will be this is the one thing open on your screen, and put your phone where it's not right next to you. It can be on the floor, it could be in a backpack. Just move it. You don't have to turn it off, just move it. And then I'm going to ask you to, wherever you are, sit in a way where you don't have to worry about your posture, but sit in a way you can be comfortable for 5 minutes or so, and then please close your eyes. We're going to do just a few minutes simple meditation practice on gratitude. And just bring your attention inward. That just means to bring your attention inside of you. Bring your awareness, your mind, kind of inside of you, either towards your heart or towards your belly. But bring your attention inside. And just allow yourself to relax. If you do bring your attention inside, your breathing will slow a little bit and gentle. And when you allow your breathing to slow a little bit, when you inhale, your breath naturally starts to push your belly out. Like there's some of the tension of holding your belly in releases. And really allow yourself to try as best you can to feel safe right where you are, just right where you are. And when you inhale, have your abdomen expand. And when you exhale, have your abdomen contract. And then just for a moment, remember a time when you knew you were loved. Even if it was just a moment, just remember a time when you knew you were loved. And then just try to feel that. Just try to feel that experience of love just while you sit here for a moment. Like almost feel it in your heart. And then let that go. Just let that go. Let the image go. Let the feeling go. Very gently allow your eyes to open. So one of the things that I've seen with like people who don't forgive and a lot of people who have had issues with substances is they hold on to negativity and then use that as part of their like self-definition. You know, I'm Fred, I had a crappy mother. Like that's a self-definition. Now, I'm Fred and I had a mother who was unskillful. That's true. But I'm Fred and I had a crappy mother. Well, that's my definition and that's my formula for it. It lacks compassion and you know, crappy's a judgment. But if I walk around with I'm Fred and I had a crappy mother, then I'm not going to find the moments when my mother actually was loving and kind. And I'm going to blame her. And that is an incredible deceit that we all do. We have to have control of our memory. So we could have had a terribly abusive marriage. We could have. Well, we could have had really bad parents. And yet, if the sun is shining right now and we don't see it, it's not our partner or our parents' fault. We just didn't see the sun and we didn't try to. But that's not mom's fault. And that's not your ex's fault. It may not be anybody's fault. It's just the way it is. But we miss so much of the world's beauty because of our grudges. And then we blame whatever it is we hold the grudge against because we think they ruined us. It's not their problem. We want it to be their problem, but it's not their problem. And that's a very interesting difference. We want it to be their problem, or we want it to be the past's problem, but it's simply our issue in the present, right now. What do you want? That's our question. What do you want now? What kind of life you want? And when you forgive, you give yourself a chance to ask yourself that question in a way that might actually be useful. Like that's the thing. Like, what kind of life do I want now? Not who ruined it in the past, not how did I screw up my life for doing X, Y, and Z. All that might be true. But what do you want now? Like right now, if you had a choice as to where you want your mind to be, where do you want it to be? Do you want it to be somebody who's still blaming dead people? I mean, that's a great recipe for happiness. I remember it's one of my first couples that I ever saw as a therapist. I mean, this is when I knew absolutely nothing about therapy. Like I'm talking about last week. I mean, but because you never really know a lot about therapy. Don't let anybody kid you. It's like nobody knows a lot about other human beings. You barely know stuff about yourself. You do get better as a therapist at minimizing the damage you do to your clients. And you do get a hell of a lot better at exercising self control as a therapist. So you say way many less stupid things and you do recognize patterns. I'm not, but do you actually become a genius at helping people? No. You just get better. So, but this was like 30 years ago, and I was a complete idiot. And so I'm sitting in a room with two people who don't like each other. And they're married. That's the problem. They didn't like each other and they weren't married. They could just walk out. That would have been the first line of defense. Well, so you don't like this person. Why don't you just walk out of here? But they were married. So they start like bitching at each other. And I'm thinking to myself, literally, this is me as a naive therapist. What the hell is wrong with you people? You're acting like absolute jerks in front of a stranger. Like, where did you go wrong? Like, you can't even act civil in front of somebody you don't know. So what, are you paying me so you can act like a jerk? And they're not paying me much. This was back when California had real mental health services. So you could go into county mental health in California back in the 80s, and you could see an intern like I was for like $5 and get real counseling. I mean that seriously. I had a full caseload. I was in a community counseling center in Santa Clara County, which is right near San Jose. I was in Los Gatos. We had a dozen interns. The center had 20 therapists. Just in Los Gatos and San Jose, the California had a real mental health system. So for $5, you got to sit with somebody who didn't know what they were doing, which is not a bad deal because some people now pay $300 an hour to sit with people who don't know what they're doing. So what a deal I was. It's like I was such a gift. They only wasted $25 on their whole series. Anyway, so I'm sitting there, and it turns out that the husband thought that his job as a husband was to change his wife. So he had to tell her all the things she did wrong. This was his purpose in life. And so he's telling me, like, she doesn't do this, she doesn't do that. She's not a good sex partner. She doesn't cook well. She doesn't understand me. I mean, this guy is like my thinking, being naive before I realize that you can't be that naive and make money off people if you actually say what you think. Um, but there was a part of me that thought I should wave my hand and say, hey, buddy, do you really think behaving like this is going to get somebody to be nice to you? Anyway, he's going on. She's just sitting there. And I'm thinking she deserves combat pay for being married to this guy. Like that's my mind. But after about 5 minutes of telling her how wrong she is, everybody stops. Like, she doesn't say anything. He doesn't say anything. And I don't know what to say because I'm terrible at this. So nobody's talking. And it's getting really uncomfortable. So an idea comes to my head, which was, okay, so let me see if I get this right. I said to him, so she's not a great sex partner. She's a terrible cook. She doesn't do great with this and that. So, and then I looked at her and I said, so let's say you became a sex goddess, you became Julia Child, you got a high paying job, you became Mother of the Year, whatever it is. If you became all of these things, what the hell would you want with him? And she breaks out in laughter. He doesn't even know what's going on. But I saw then this was one of the learnings of my life about how ugly we are when we complain and we're so self-absorbed that we don't recognize what victim status does to us. He projected out all this ugliness, all this self-pity, all this criticism, thinking that she was wrong. He didn't recognize how unattractive that was. We don't recognize how unattractive we are in the role of victim. I didn't, thankfully, I had a very forgiving wife. I didn't realize how unattractive I was the way I behaved towards my mother. Think about that. If you want to become your best self, we need to forgive. But we also need, and I know this is essential to 12 steps in my interpretation of it, we need to be honest about our behavior. That fearless inventory. But I think it's also more, I'm not going to say primitive, but I mean more basic to the 12-step programs. And, I checked out and I realized that I was powerless over my addiction. But I think it's also saying I realized I was powerless over my asshole status. But it's this truth telling, like this very basic, I ain't such hot stuff either. But I can and I do things that offend people and hurt people. And all of it, both how the world has harmed me and how I have contributed to my own suffering, it's all forgivable. That's the gift. But if you're just blaming others, in some level, in my humble, not full appreciation of 12-stepness, you haven't quite got on the path yet. That it starts with, I'm out of control. I mean, I'm not telling anything you don't know, but it also has to do with, I'm not behaving in a way that gives me a chance to have a good life. And so the compassion piece of, yeah, I've been harmed. There have been ways that life has been absolute shit. And that may be so. And I can still be kind about it. And I can still be grateful for what I have. So it all starts with truth telling, all of it, honesty and clarity. And then the hard part is making sure your heart stays open. That your way of languaging the truth doesn't shut down your heart so none sun gets in. That's the crucial place of determination. So I had shut down my heart towards my mother. So no matter what she did, nothing got in anymore. It wasn't her fault that nothing got in anymore. That was on me. So you can tell the truth about what has happened without using that as an endless reason to shut down your heart. And when you notice your heart is shut down, you need to open it back up. There is so much beauty out there to see. You have been loved in ways you don't even understand, even if you don't notice it. The world has served you just like it serves me. Like that idea, the earth gives us air. The earth gives you sunshine. The earth gives you apples. The earth gives you people. When we are bitter, we shut that down. So we don't see it, but it doesn't mean it's not there. So on the first gratitude thing, I'm going to have you do another. On the first gratitude thing, it was remember when you were loved. Pay attention to when you were loved. Remember it. See goodness in others. So let me give you one more practice, and then I'll do a more formal meditation. But I'm going to ask everybody to stop for just 1 second and just try to center yourself for a moment. You don't have to close your eyes. I don't even want you to close your eyes. But center yourself for just a moment. And take a breath, quiet. And then ask yourself, how many times in the last 24 hours did I say thank you to people for being good to me? If you want to do a gut check of how well you're seeing reality, that's a good one. How many times in the last 24 hours did I say thank you? If you're married or have a significant other and they came home, did you say thank you at some level, even if it's not external? Did you say it internally? Thank you for putting up with me. Thank you for recommitting yourself to me. Thank you for tolerating what a jerk I am again. Thank you. Did your partner go to work? Bring home resources? Thank you if they did. This doesn't have to be like you walk around after them saying thank you, It's like, but it's in your heart. Do you say it? Do you remember? Thank you. If you learn to say thank you, you will learn to forgive. It's that simple. If you learn to say thank you, you will learn to forgive. Unforgiveness is a sign that you're like, thank you, bitchy balance is out of alignment. Your bitchy is stronger than your thank you. And that's fine. If your partner dumps you, you want your bitchy balance to be out of alignment. If you get fired from a job unfairly, you want your bitchy balance out of alignment. But you don't want to wake up that way. And you don't want to go through your day defending your lack of goodwill by how the world hasn't served you. That's not healthy for you. It doesn't make you happy. So let me take what I just did and do it in a more formal meditation practice. So again, please close your eyes. Another 5 minutes or so, but for this, I do need your eyes closed. Bring your into your center, bring your attention. Quiet down your breathing. And mostly allow yourself to relax enough so that when you inhale, your abdomen expands and gets bigger. This is the central physiologic piece of relaxation. When you inhale, feel safe enough so that your belly can expand. Your belly, not your chest and shoulders. You want to breathe into and out of your belly. One nice gratitude practice is when you inhale, just say thank you for being alive. As you breathe in from your heart, just say thank you. When you exhale, just let it go. But when you inhale, say thank you for this life. Thank you for my breath. Thank you for everything on this planet. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be a human being here. Thank you. When you exhale, just let it all go. When you inhale, say thank you. Thank you for being able to love. Thank you for being able to see. Thank you for delicious food. Just thank you. And then just allow it to fade, allow it to pass. Take a deep breath and then very gently just allow your eyes to open. So what's so really weird about this is, and this is something that it took me 20 years of teaching before I came to understand that this was not this was not there when I began. But what's really weird is that you're not actually forgiving anything but life. You may think you're forgiving a specific person or yourself, but you're not. What you're doing is an algorithm with life. It's like saying, was I treated well enough in the whole picture to be okay now? That's actually what you're doing. Did I have enough love, richness, goodness? Was life good enough for me to be gracious right this moment? We're constantly asking that question. We like to think it's about mom or the ex or ourselves, but it's really right now. Did I experience enough love, goodness, and beauty so I can be open now to life? That's the question. And if you don't have a good practice in seeing life and love and goodness, that question doesn't get answered too easily. So wherever you are, just look out your window for a moment and notice how beautiful it is outside. Just wherever you are. I mean, you're somewhere with a window, unless you're in a jail cell, and then, God bless. But take a moment, stand up, and walk over to your window and just notice, giving yourself the freedom for a moment to just notice how beautiful it is. I'm asking you to stand up because you've probably been sitting for the last 90 minutes. So it's good to stand up and move for a minute. Okay. Um, when I say that we're not actually forgiving anything but life, I want to add a little nuance to that because that's true and it's not true. At the proximate time that somebody or you really screws up. So, in my forgiveness work, I had experiences of listening to people who have done really horrific things in this world. Some of them deliberate, some of them accidental. I've been in the midst of some political situations where people have done violence because their side was against another side, or just grotesque tribal things. And I've also listened to people who have made mistakes, and those mistakes have really hurt other people. So the most painful that I ever heard along those lines was I was speaking at a conference of burn victims, and each of them had just been hideously burned, and they had a society. They do have a society of burn victims. And so I gave a keynote address on forgiveness. And, a lot of them were harmed by other people. Fires, accidents, really life being just horrendous. But one woman came up to me, um, I don't remember when, could be 20 years ago. And she said, I don't know how to forgive myself. And I'm here because I was driving on the freeway, and like we started to slow down because I saw traffic up ahead. I slowed down, and traffic stopped, and then it started, and I I lost my head, and in one of the stops, I reached over and I pulled something out of the glove compartment, and I lost track of where I was, and then I pushed the gas pedal, and I slammed into the car in front of me, just from reaching over to the glove compartment for about 5 seconds, maybe less. But the car in front of her, she hit that car in a way that exploded the gas tank of the car in front of her. And two of the people in the car were killed, and one was killed, and one had a massive series of burns. And this woman, God bless her, had taken as part of her life, she was going to help the woman who had burns because she felt responsible. And I thought that was just remarkable. But so she had to live with committing real harm. And so for her, self forgiveness was not just, it's not just you want to look at the good and the bad you did and decide that you did more good than bad, so it's okay that you killed somebody, even if it was a total accident, and it was. So there's a period. This is the crucial nuance. With serious things, there's a period after the offense, both if you've done it or if it was done to you, where you have to grapple with things. And there's nothing wrong with suffering. This is something that I really want to make clear. There is nothing wrong with suffering if you've caused harm or if real harm was caused you. That's called grief. Forgiveness doesn't bypass grief. If your mom was terrible when you were 16 and you're 43, grief's done, unless you never did it. You don't get 30 years to grieve, but you have to take the time to grieve. I'm really emphasizing this. And some of that time can be front loaded. So when you're 16 to 25 and you had a crappy mom, it can take time to work that through. Not to 45, but time. But if you harm somebody by any of you with substance abuse or neglect of children. It's essential to suffer for that. Just not make that your identity. But it's essential. If you harmed your kids by not being present, yeah, there's pain involved in seeing yourself clearly. There's always pain involved in seeing life clearly. But grief is meant to be time limited. It's your brain's reorganization. It's essential. All of a sudden, your brain goes from, well, maybe I have a substance abuse issue, to, boy, do I have a substance abuse issue and it hurts someone. Or even, boy, does my partner have a substance abuse issue and I didn't intervene, so I helped hurt other people. Truth is there. Truth hurts. It's called grief. It doesn't give you a reason to hate yourself or anybody as a forward-looking thing. But at some point, every one of us has to grieve the wounds that we have in our life. So if you were 8 and your parents were neglectful, you may not grieve that at 8. You may grieve it at 28 or 38. It's still there. After that, after the period of grieving, which, for serious things can be a year or two, of really wrestling with suffering, both suffering you've received and suffering you've caused, that can take a year or two. Generally, healthy grief doesn't take much more than that, but that's a serious thing to hold that. After that, that's when I meant that it's really a question of what kind of day do I want, more than, do I let my mother off the hook, or do I let somebody off the hook from hurting me 30 years ago? Past that actual grieving, that's when it's a algorithm. And if you haven't practiced positivity enough, and loving kindness enough, and open-hearted enough, then it's going to be very hard to fill your heart when you need it. And so the essence of what we have been teaching around forgiveness is that you have to practice positive things during your life. Those are as or more important as actually going back and investigating whatever it is you think has harmed you or whatever harm you did. So here's I'm gonna ask you to do one more meditation, but this is eyes open again, just as a simple reminder. So let me ask you to stop where you are this one more time, because I'm going to talk for about 10 more minutes, and then I'll take questions if you want. But just stop where you are for a minute. That means, no multitasking, please. And just again, take a deep breath for a sec. You can keep your eyes open or closed. And just take another deep breath. And just remember a time when you really did the right thing. Where when it was difficult, you loved or served or were kind-hearted. Picture it for a second. Picture your own selflessness and your own goodness. See it. And just, if you can, take that in, that acknowledgement that I am capable of kindness and generosity of spirit, and just try to feel that. Bring that goodness inside. And then let that go. Just let it go. Take a breath and allow your eyes to open. Many of us think it's the past that's hurting us. It is a little bit, but it's more the present and how we hold ourselves in the present. You can feel a lot of shame for things that you've done. And that's probably appropriate. But if you don't balance that with remembrance of what you've done positively, then it's like you're creating an eclipse of the sun. The sun's still there, but you've blocked it. It's the same with the world. If you don't see the world's goodness and other people's kindness, that's not the past's fault. What we think of, and this is one of those insights that I wish I heard more about, but I don't, is what we're really upset about when we think other people have harmed us. It's not that they've harmed us as much as we can't find life's goodness now. We've lost the path. And so we blame them because it's easier, we think, than finding the path again. So if your partner cheats on you and lies to you and ends the relationship, or you end the relationship because you don't like the way they behave, the grief period of 6 months or a year of suffering, that's absolutely essential. Not 5 years, not even 3 years. But that period of suffering is essential. This is not like a kumbaya, it's all good. There's no such, that's not what forgiveness is. It's not denial, it's not minimization, it's not any of that stuff. It's hard. It's a deep understanding that life is a challenge and that we need to find inner resources to deal with it. But that possibility inside of us to get over being cheated upon and not have to identify ourselves as a victim for more than 6 months or a year, and not have to pay anybody back because they harmed us. What we need to do is become happy again. And as long as we think they're the reason that we're not happy, we're going to try to get them to change rather than trying to make ourselves happier. And that's how we make our lives miserable. It's their fault. Somehow I'm not responsible right now in 2023 for my happiness. Somebody else is, or my past is. That's a fool's errand. Doesn't work. But it's very compelling to say, well, my childhood was just too hard, or my marriage was just too hard, or my job was just too hard, or my partner's, substance abuse was just too hard, or my substance issues were just too hard for me to be happy now. So much of forgiveness is simply turning your attention back to now and trying to be happier in it with what your life actually is. I remember one client years ago, like she was pissed off at her parents for not loving her enough. And I remember she was sitting in my office and she was telling me, I don't know, she couldn't have been more than 25. And she was telling me that her parents were paying her college tuition. And I thought, okay, that's pretty nice. And that they were sending her on a vacation somewhere exotic, and they were supporting her living expenses. So she's telling me this, and I'm trying to figure out where it is that they don't love her. And then she'd tell me how they didn't love her. And I'd say, okay, that sounds pretty unlovable, but what about the ways they do love you? And that was the tension in her. She chose. Now, I'm not saying they were parents of the year, but she was making herself way more miserable and not forgiving their failures because she didn't appreciate enough what they offered. And that's not their fault. None of that is their fault when you're 25. When you're 10, it might be more their fault. But when you're 25, what you pay attention to and how you process the world and the decisions you make as to how you evaluate the world, that's on you. And we don't like that. It's hurtful to us to be responsible in that way for our well-being now. So I'm going to wrap it up in like 2 or 3 minutes. Our definition of forgiveness is making peace with the word no, which means taking all the ways that life disappointed you and in the present making peace with that. Making peace with the word no. You didn't get what you wanted. Life didn't turn out the way you wanted. You didn't turn out the way you wanted, whatever. It's making peace with it. It's not approving of it. It's not rejecting it. It's just making peace with it. Life is making peace. Forgiveness is making peace with the word no. The other two, like essential statements around forgiveness, one is Desmond Tutu's, without forgiveness, there is no future. Because what Desmond Tutu recognized, well, without forgiveness, we're living in the past. And we're bringing the past forward rather than allowing a future to occur. Which is how you see tribal things all over the world never moving on. Catholics and Protestants and Jews and Palestinians and in Rwanda, Hutus and Tutsis and all over the world, families. Without forgiveness, there is no future because you're stuck in the past. And the other one is the famous one that's been attributed to Nelson Mandela. I'm not sure that it's from him. I think it's from, but forgiveness is giving up all hope of a better past. And those are the three cardinal understandings of forgiveness. You don't always get what you want, and you have to make peace with that. You don't always behave the way you want, and you have to make peace with that. if you stay stuck in the past, you will not see the present, and you will not create an actual future because you'll just be replaying the past. And forgiveness means giving up all hope for a better past, which means again that you got the path, you got the past that you got, and there's nothing that can alter that. Nothing. So you and I have to decide how much we let that past ruin our present. Again, going back to that 12-step idea of, I'm powerless in front of my grudges or my resentments or whatever. And my freedom starts by acknowledging that and then telling the truth. The way that generally we can do this more rapidly is that whatever fearless moral inventory, I don't know the exact words for 12-step stuff, but we harm ourselves in the world now more than others' past actions are harming us. So if you're in a crappy mood because you're bitter, you're harming yourself and other people. And when we can see that, it hurts, but it also makes us want to change. It hurts. I did go through some real stuff when I realized how unskillfully I dealt with my mother. She was a difficult woman. Was she terrible? No. Did she? I mean, she's not even in the Bad Mothers Hall of Fame, but I didn't recognize this then. But once my wife cracked through my self-absorption and I started to see things more clearly, part of that seeing it more clearly was really feeling terrible for my behavior. And that's part of the process. That's why I've said over this last half hour, you don't get away pain-free. I felt terrible for some of the things that I said to her and some of the ways that I treated her, and it was all because I didn't forgive her. And once I forgave her, then I saw things more clearly. And I could do some healing. So I wrote my mother a letter. And I remember this because I was still not quite ready to fully forgive. I remember this. And I knew that I had to do something because I didn't like my own crappy nature. But I couldn't write, Mom, I forgive you fully. I love you dearly. I couldn't do that. So what I did is I wrote her a letter thanking her for whatever she did as a mom. Whatever she did enabled me to have the life that I have, one where I'm successful, that I'm loved, and I could not have done that without the parenting that she gave me. And so I wrote her a strong thank you for that. So that was my way of getting around, I love you dearly, you're great. I didn't feel that. But I had to free myself. So I literally wrote her with that, like, thank you so much. I finally realized that there's no way I could be where I am now without whatever it is you offered me. Here's the kicker, and it was shocking to me. She didn't live that much after I wrote that letter, and I had no idea she wasn't that sick. But I know that when she died and I went to her funeral, a handful of her friends came up to me and thanked me for writing that.
Mhm.
And they said, you have no idea the peace that brought her. No idea. I didn't write it for that reason. I didn't know she was that ill. And she, whatever. But that also influenced my forgiveness work because I could then tell everybody with personal conviction, you may not have as long as you think you have to make amends and to repair a relationship. Had I not done that, my life would have been worse moving forward. Just that simple thanking her for whatever I could legitimately thank her for made all the difference, and it freed me. And that wasn't my intention. I hope you understand. I'm not giving you any brilliance here. I just did the best I could. It just turned out to be a lifesaver for me because I wouldn't have had to carry that with me. I was free. Anyway, I thank you for your attention. I appreciate these opportunities from Herb to talk about forgiveness with you folks. Other than that, if you have a question, it's probably easiest to put it in the chat, and I'll answer whatever questions there are. So if you do have a question for me about forgiveness, just write it in the chat function. If you don't, I thank you for your attention, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.
And you can also thank Fred very much. That's been wonderful. I have a couple comments. Yes, please put it in the chat for Fred, and Rainey will help with that, I'm assuming, and Nan. At the same time, if you have something that is a little longer, you might want to raise your hand, and just stay really focused in terms of asking your question or sharing your experience. As you know, I try to minimize the story parts and get to the actual issue. Fred, you've added a couple things here that I don't recall your including in your conversations, which is
Hey,
wonderful.
Herb, I have to grow somehow after all these years, don't I?
No, it was wonderful. The entire area of compassion and grief, both of those are, at least from my standpoint, new terminologies that you used and new explanations and experience with it, which I found very sort of giving it a lot more flesh. It was wonderful to fill that out. And then you made the comment, which I want to underscore it for people. I have been unskillful. I mean, that's just a wonderful self-compassion to release me from that burden of guilt or shame or whatever the negativity is. I have been unskillful. And that's just an admission of now I'm going to move forward because I have some information and resources that I didn't have before. I also heard another expression, and I'm sure you've heard it, concerning circumstances and events or people that have negatively impacted people. And rather than the blaming, it's you've had some unfortunate experiences. And I love the phrase. It's just sort of like, oh yeah, it just neutralizes it in terms of, yeah, this is reality. Really sucks, doesn't it?
So, Herb, here's the challenge that we all face, all of us. How do we acknowledge that there's ugliness,
Yeah.
unkindness, and maybe even evil in this world
Yeah.
without getting lost in it? Like,
Yeah.
we all are challenged by that. So you may have been living with an abusive parent or partner. There's no minimizing or lying about that. Do you understand? I mean,
Right.
you can't soft sell that. It's how do I put this? Like, it's not healthy to
It's not
minimize.
healthy, it's not helpful. And in the long run, if you want to think the long run, and you made the point about grief, grief is a very important, integral part of a successful forgiveness process, but it's not a quicksand for 5 years. It's like
No.
get in, process it, get out.
So what I'm saying is we all struggle to find the middle point between actively talking about what was wrong and recognizing that that's not a long-term excuse or reason to ruin our or anybody else's life.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge, and that is part of the that's what the grief process is about.
The
You
biggest
suffer.
the biggest experience I had with this process, and I was 48 years old, 4 years sober, was the awareness that, oh, yeah, I was a victim, but I'm not now.
Exactly.
I am
That's
just
it.
perpetuating the story and making myself a victim. And I was embarrassed that I had never seen it before, but it was the catalyst for the change. I ask people now, well, yes, you've had this past, yes, you've been betrayed. How free do you want to be and how soon? Because you need to take responsibility. The biggest thing, and one of the things that you said, is for people to take responsibility. I find that's where people have a huge resistance to take responsibility for their current life now.
And it's a process that it can't be just reduced to words. So like just substituting unskillful, that's better than you're an asshole.
No, wonderful, yeah.
But it's a process that we go through inside
Yeah,
of healing.
yes.
And that you can end up at unskillful as a place which says it wasn't right, but I'm not hateful towards the person.
Yeah.
And it's no difference than the Bible saying, like, hate the sin, love the sinner. It's like we all have to figure that out.
I needed two things. I needed the suffering and the awareness that I could stop that, but I also needed an accountability or a mentor or a teacher or a coach that was able to mirror back what objective reality was and guide me through the process. I could not have done it on my own.
Couldn't agree more. So let me take a few of these questions before
Please.
I go. There's a couple of questions on self forgiveness. The essence of self forgiveness to me is very much in alignment with the limited stuff that I understand of the 12-step process. And it's not that I'm totally naive about the 12-step process. I spent a year in a VA hospital as a therapeutic intern, and I had, I'm going to say, a 9-month rotation in their drug and alcohol unit where everybody was required to attend 12-step programs. And so I had some introduction, just not long-term work in that way. I did spend 9 months in a VA hospital in that capacity. But what I have understood out of that about self-forgiveness is your feelings are not as important as you think. What's important about self-forgiveness is acknowledging the wrong, apologizing for the harm done, making amends where you can, and then doing what you can not to do it again. It's much simpler than we think. Like, you have to acknowledge the wrong in order for self-forgiveness to mean anything. You then have to, like, apologize to whoever it might have been that the harm was, or to yourself for the harm done, not for your intentions. Whenever way you can make amends, and sometimes this is what gets really interesting. You can't make amends directly. So sometimes you have to make amends indirectly. So I have told people who have been terrible parents to go to your local elementary school and agree to read to little kids. Like
Right. Absolutely.
the
Some
amends,
symbolic action.
exactly. The
Yeah.
amends are to the universe,
Yeah.
and you have a karmic debt, so to speak.
Yeah.
If you've harmed things, that this amend business is not trivial.
Right.
It's the cornerstone of self-forgiveness.
Right.
It is. It's the essential cornerstone of it, that you have to do something right to balance something you did wrong. So self-forgiveness, you have the opportunity to let yourself off the hook when you've done those things. Your feelings don't matter. So if you have apologized, if you have sincerely acknowledged the wrong you did, if you've tried to make it right and you've done something to try to not do it again, you're free. You don't owe the world eternal self-punishment. It doesn't do anything. It's meaningless. It's actually meaningless. It's a waste of your life. Not doing those things is meaningful, but beating yourself up has no meaning whatsoever. So that's the essence of self-forgiveness. That's its core. And it's based in almost entirely on this fearless inventory and making amends. I checked it out. I really did that. I'm sorry. You know, it's all right. So that's the self-forgiveness piece. The other question that I see came up is, what's the boundary between forgiveness, compassion, and being a doormat?
Yeah.
Like that I saw. And that's a really good question.
Yeah.
So if you have compassion towards yourself, you don't want to be a doormat.
Right.
Like, why would you want to hurt you? I mean, people do, and some of that is related to how they were treated and the way they were modeled as children. There's no question they're related. But the question is like, okay, so I'm in an abusive relationship, not even abusive, let's just say unsatisfying, with somebody who doesn't know how to love, which is, different than abuse. Abuse is pretty harsh, and I'm going to also say, as a therapist, abuse is less common than we say it is. Just like, the professional estimates of narcissism are not that high, but everybody has a narcissistic ex. So, it's like, I'm just saying everybody refers to their ex as a narcissist. So, abuse is not as common as we make it. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but let's just say you're with a bad partner who's selfish and unkind, and and you're there for the wrong reasons. So defining good boundaries has to do with both of you. So self-compassion would say, you know, I don't really deserve to be suffering around this. I like me. I can understand why it's hard for me to set these boundaries, and I forgive myself for not doing so. But if I like me, I need to have a conversation with partner and say, hey, you're late all the time, and I don't know where you are, and you may be with other people. That's not okay with me, and I'm not going to hate you for it. It's just that I like me. So that's a boundary based on compassion and forgiveness.
Part of the issue that I've become aware of recently as a pandemic is in my workshops, though, the lack of self-esteem amongst individuals, the lack of sense of personal value or worthiness. That it may be just a selective attention kind of a phenomena with me, but it seems to be more prevalent than I'd ever seen before.
Wow. That's 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 just a sad commentary.
It is, yeah. Mhm.
It's very likely to me that the consequence to the coronavirus, where everything shut down and people went to Zoom, did a tremendous harm to everybody's mental health.
Yeah.
And I think the wearing of masks,
Mm.
even if it was medically useful, made everybody a little nuts because once you can't see people's faces,
Mm.
and once they can't see yours, trust disappears.
Mm.
If you can't see whether somebody's telling you the truth because you can't see their facial thing and they can't tell it of you, then relationships markedly deteriorate. And that time when this was the substitute for real life was not good for our souls in
Mm.
terms of relationship and
Mhm.
trust. So
Mhm.
that's one of my responses to what you said, Herb.
Yeah.
All right, let me just see if there's anything else. I think that's it. I think,
Mm.
oh, wait. How do I act loving towards someone who won't forgive me and harbors deep resentment towards me and makes it difficult for me? Um, well, it depends on how strongly you let them know that you feel badly for the harm you did them. What I read here is all about you. So it might give me pause as to how much other interest you had. Um, but so the essence is like, did you let this person know that you are really sorry for what happened to them, not for what happened to you? Vastly different thing. And have you tried to change yourself in ways so that what happened to you, to them, will not happen again? The other thing is to examine yourself to say, when I talk to them, am I full of self justification? You know, I didn't mean it, but if you're full of self justification, they know you're full of shit. I'm just letting you know, they just know you're full of shit.
Yeah.
And so those are the things you can do. If that doesn't work, then the simplest thing is just have a direct conversation, which is, I was wrong. I did wrong. I thought I apologized. I meant to apologize. I've tried to change. If that's not enough for you, let me know. And we probably do have to go separate ways, but that's not what I want.
Yeah.
So a direct conversation like that would be helpful.
Yeah.
That's all you can do. Anyway, everyone, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Fred, very much for your time. And we'll schedule some more if you have time and interest.
Thank you. I've enjoyed these over these last years with you, Herb. Thank you again, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. And thank you, my crew, the group. Um, I'm going to, that took a totally different turn than I had expected, as you probably anticipated from the way I introduced Fred. But again, some dimensions of conversations that we hadn't experienced and he hadn't perhaps even been aware of himself. So I hope that was helpful to everybody. I don't see any particular hands up, so I'm going to bring it to conclusion. I do have a hard stop, and we will reschedule. We will schedule another bout with Dr. Fred Luskin, and I might even do a separate workshop on forgiveness with a more emphasis on the 12-step process that I experienced, but incorporating the work that Dr. Luskin has done as I've at least been exposed to it. So let me see if I can get to the prayer. I had lots of things to talk about. Oh, I think I'm going to talk about this for a little bit. Because Fred made such a point of the gratitude. This is my approach to a daily practice that includes the forgiveness dimension, is commit to a gratitude list. And I don't mean making a list of everything you're grateful for every day, but a particular kind of approach, which is to have a list and put one thing on it that you're grateful for, just one, and the next day put another one. But the rule is, arbitrary of course, the rule is you can never put something on the list that's already on the list. So after 30 or 60 or 90 days, you're going to have to be quite creative about what you're grateful for that particular day. And the point that I'm making there, which Fred made, which I was very pleased to see, and that is the growth in our positivity in terms of looking at reality and looking at our lives. Fred won't talk about prayer and meditation because, as he said very clearly, he comes from a secular, but he talks about certainly the positive attitude and the positive affirmations and the phrases that are used to reorient our attitudes and our perceptions, which comes very close to prayer. And of course, he introduced meditation as a reflection, not necessarily as a spiritual practice, but certainly as very healthy, secular, psychological healing practice. And then he taught very clearly about the helpful actions, intentional compassion. I mean, this is all coming out of my work, my understanding in the spiritual realm, in the 12-step realm, and you can see how closely it reflects Dr. Luskin's approach and recommendation from the psychological. He didn't talk too much about accountability, and we'll get him to talk a little bit more about that later on. Freedom is what we're looking for. And this is the prayer, St. Francis, that I've adapted to our current life, to the now that he talked about, not eternal life. I'm much more interested in this life and in no hurry to leave it. Please join me in this prayer. Spirit of the universe, make me a channel of your peace, that where there is hatred, I may bring love, that where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness, that where there is discord, I may bring harmony, that where there is error, I may bring truth, that where there is doubt, I may bring faith, that where there is despair, I may bring hope, that where there are shadows, I may bring light, that where there is sadness, I may bring joy. Grant that I seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. That's that turning. That's that process. That's that promise from self-centered to other-centered, which we're so familiar with as the theme of the 12-step process. For it is by self-forgetting that one finds, it is by forgiving that one is forgiven. It is by dying that one awakens to this life. Amen. Again, thanks everybody for your participation. I hope that was helpful, and stay tuned.